Every time I sit beside her, the world feels smaller, and she whispers something that makes my heart stop. Keep sitting beside me, and I'll forget we're just friends. It started innocently enough. I was at my friend's house again, the kind of Saturday afternoon I usually spent scrolling through my phone or half listening to whatever show was on in the living room. But that day, something felt different the moment I stepped inside. My friend's mom was there, moving around the kitchen with a quiet grace that always made the space feel warmer, more alive. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, just in jeans and a soft sweater, but the way she carried herself, calm and confident, somehow drew my attention in a way I couldn't ignore. I remember the first time it happened, sitting beside her on the couch to watch a movie while my friend grabbed a snack from the kitchen. It was nothing extraordinary, just two people sharing a sofa. Yet, when I sat down, I felt the subtle warmth radiating from her side, the faint scent of her perfume brushing against me as if it were daring me to notice. My arm brushed against hers, an accidental graze that lingered a second too long, and I caught myself pulling back slightly, even though the moment itself was harmless. Her presence had a strange effect on me. The way she adjusted herself, tucking one leg beneath her, leaning slightly toward the screen, made the space between us feel charged without a single word being spoken. I became acutely aware of every subtle motion, the way her fingers twitched as she reached for the remote, the soft brush of her hair when she shifted her head, the light in her eyes that seemed to notice me noticing her. I couldn't help but feel both drawn in and slightly guilty, as if enjoying her company this much was some kind of quiet transgression. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she moved and spoke in those small, domestic moments. Even when she wasn't looking at me directly, I found myself tuning into the soft rhythm of her breathing, the faint hum of a song she was whistling while making tea, the light warmth of her shoulder pressed just a little too close as she reached for a blanket. Every ordinary gesture seemed imbued with subtle intimacy, and I couldn't tell whether I was imagining it or if she was somehow aware of the small effect she had on me. I reminded myself it was ridiculous. She was my friend's mom, not some fictional character designed to make my heart pound. And yet, as I sat there, shoulder to shoulder with her on the couch, I felt an unfamiliar tension in the air, a quiet electricity that made me hyper-aware of every movement, every touch, every fleeting glance. It was the start of something I didn't yet understand, a gentle nudge at the edges of my awareness, teasing me with possibilities that were both thrilling and impossible. That day, nothing overt happened. There were no confessions, no sudden gestures. Just the quiet, unspoken awareness of proximity, the kind that lingers long after the couch has been vacated, leaving you replaying every accidental brush of hands, every shared laugh, every subtle warmth that felt, somehow, unforgettable. After that first afternoon, our encounters began to feel different. It wasn't that she had changed. She remained warm, approachable, effortlessly elegant in the way only she could be. But I found myself noticing the little things more, how her laugh could linger in the room like sunlight, how the tilt of her head made her eyes catch the light just so, how her presence seemed to fill the space even when she wasn't speaking. And somehow, I had become hyper-aware of being near her. It started with small moments that should have been ordinary. She'd hand me a snack across the kitchen counter, and our fingers would brush for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Or she'd lean over to adjust a picture on the wall, her shoulder pressing slightly against mine. Each contact was fleeting, yet electric in its subtlety, leaving me acutely conscious of the warmth of her skin, the softness of her sweater, the delicate curve of her wrist. My pulse would quicken, and I'd remind myself to look away, pretending not to notice the way her perfume lingered just at the edge of my senses. Then came the whispers. Nothing overt, nothing inappropriate, just words meant for my ears alone, spoken with a playful lilt that made my stomach flutter. A casual joke, a teasing comment about how I always seemed to linger in the living room, or a light-hearted remark about my choice of snack. The words were harmless, but the way she leaned closer to whisper them, the faint warmth of her breath against my cheek, made me suddenly aware of the space we were sharing. It was intimate, yes, but still safe, just enough to keep me uncomfortably, thrillingly aware of her presence. The tension between us was silent, a shared understanding neither of us acknowledged aloud. I caught her glances more often now, those subtle, lingering looks that didn't last long enough to be considered staring, but long enough to make me feel seen in a way that went deeper than casual attention. Sometimes she would brush her hair back with a hand that seemed to linger near mine, just for a moment, as if testing the air between us. Each touch, each look, each whispered joke built a quiet rhythm that I couldn't escape, a pull I tried, and failed, to ignore. I found myself noticing even the smallest details. The way she sat, one leg crossed elegantly over the other, the soft sigh she made when she relaxed into a chair, the way her lips curved when she laughed at my clumsy attempt to reach for something on the counter. Each gesture, each sound, seemed amplified, turning the ordinary into something charged with meaning. Even as I told myself it was nothing, just familiarity, just comfort, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was shifting, that our interactions carried a tension neither of us fully understood. It was thrilling and confusing all at once, this delicate dance of playful proximity and silent awareness. And with every small brush of skin, every whispered word, every shared smile, I felt the invisible thread between us grow just a little tighter, pulling us closer without either of us daring to name what it was. By the end of the day, I realized that being near her had become intoxicating. Not in a way that demanded action or confession, but in a way that made every glance, every laugh, every fleeting touch linger in my mind far longer than it should. The playful tension was alive, quiet, and utterly irresistible. It was a quiet evening when the dynamic between us began to shift in a way I hadn't anticipated. My friend had gone out for a few hours, leaving me alone with his mom while she tidied up the living room. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the ordinary hum of a home settling into night, but something in the stillness made the air feel different, charged with a delicate tension neither of us could ignore. She moved around with her usual grace, but I noticed small signs of fatigue, a slight slump in her shoulders, a weary exhale as she set down a book, a distant look in her eyes that didn't match her usual warmth. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but I couldn't look away. "Rough day?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She glanced at me, startled for just a moment, then smiled, a little tired, a little genuine. "Just one of those days," she admitted, leaning against the back of the couch as if seeking support. I slid into the empty space beside her, careful not to crowd her, yet aware of how natural it felt to be this close. Her presence was comforting, familiar, and somehow magnetic all at once. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the vanilla from the candle she'd lit, the subtle warmth radiating from her side as we sat shoulder to shoulder. Our conversation started casually, but soon her voice softened, slowed, revealing more than she intended. She spoke of moments from her past, small regrets, fleeting disappointments, and dreams she hadn't pursued. I listened, struck by the vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. It was the first time I had seen her unguarded, truly letting someone in. My hand brushed lightly against hers when I reached for the mug she had handed me, and for a moment either of us pulled away. The warmth of her skin against mine sent an unexpected jolt through me, a quiet reminder of the unspoken connection simmering between us. I could feel the weight of her trust settling in the space between us, and it made me both protective and deeply aware of the delicate line we were treading. She shifted slightly, resting her shoulder just a touch against mine, and I noticed a faint tremor in her fingers as she sipped her tea. My heart ached in a way I didn't fully understand, partly for the tenderness of the moment, partly for the unspoken tension lingering in the air. For a long while, we simply sat together, the quiet punctuated by soft laughter at shared memories and occasional contemplative silences. Each glance held unspoken understanding. Each brush of skin seemed amplified by the vulnerability she allowed herself to show. I felt connected in a way that went beyond attraction. It was a deep, human intimacy, a sense of being trusted and trusted in return. By the end of the evening, I realized that my awareness of her had deepened far beyond the playful tension that had drawn me in. I wasn't just noticing her elegance or warmth anymore. I was noticing the strength beneath her vulnerability, the quiet courage in her honesty, and the magnetic pull of being close to someone so real, so profoundly alive. That night, something shifted. The air between us was no longer just charged, it was intimate, tentative, and full of possibilities we were only beginning to sense. It was one of those quiet evenings where the house felt suspended in a calm hush, and I found myself alone in the living room with my friend's mom. My friend had gone out to meet someone, leaving just the two of us to tidy up and sip on cups of tea. I had been visiting often enough to feel comfortable here, yet tonight, there was an unspoken weight in the air, as if the space itself were holding its breath. She was seated on the couch, leaning slightly forward with her hands wrapped around her mug, her shoulders tense. I noticed the faint crease on her forehead and the way her eyes, usually sparkling with warmth, seemed shadowed with something unsaid. I hesitated for a moment before asking softly, "Long day?" She looked up at me, startled, then gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah, just one of those days," she murmured, her voice barely above the hum of the room. I slid into the space beside her, careful to give her room yet conscious of the gentle warmth radiating from her side. The proximity felt natural, comforting, and yet, in a way I couldn't ignore, electric. I became aware of every detail, the soft texture of her sweater brushing my arm, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of the tea she had poured, the quiet steadiness of her presence that seemed to anchor the room. She began speaking, tentatively at first, about little frustrations, her work, fleeting regrets, the small disappointments life had thrown her way. Her words were soft, almost hesitant, but there was a weight to them that made me lean in, wanting to hear more, to understand. I noticed her fingers wrapped tightly around the mug, the slight tremor in her hands as she laughed softly at her own jokes. Without thinking, my hand brushed against hers as I reached for my cup, and for a brief, suspended moment, either of us moved away. The warmth of her skin, the closeness of her body, made my chest tighten in a way that was unfamiliar and intoxicating. We sat there for a while, sharing words and silences. She rested a shoulder lightly against mine, and I felt a strange mix of protectiveness and exhilaration. Her vulnerability made her more human, more real, more magnetic. I realized I was not just noticing her physical presence, but the nuances of her emotional being, the small sighs, the fleeting glances, the way she leaned slightly closer as if seeking comfort without asking. By the end of the evening, something had shifted between us. The playful tension from before had deepened into something quieter, more profound. It was no longer just awareness of proximity or accidental touches. It was an intimacy built on honesty, on shared vulnerability, on the subtle recognition of each other's presence in a way that felt deeply personal. As I left the room that night, I carried with me a heightened awareness of her, a quiet longing to be near her again, and the unsettling realization that I was falling into a space I wasn't sure either of us was ready to name. That evening felt different from the start. The house had quieted into a soft, almost sacred stillness, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock. My friend had gone out for a quick errand, leaving me alone with his mom in the living room. Normally, I would have been content scrolling through my phone or helping myself to a drink, but tonight, the energy between us was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every subtle movement carried a weight I hadn't felt before. We ended up sitting side by side on the couch again, closer than usual but still careful to maintain a comfortable distance. The movie she had chosen played silently in the background, its volume low, almost like a heartbeat in the room. I could feel her presence more acutely than ever, the warmth radiating from her side, the softness of her sweater brushing against my arm, the faint scent of her perfume lingering just at the edge of my senses. I realized my chest was tight, my heart racing in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Then it happened. A pause in the movie, a quiet moment where the room seemed to hold its breath, and she leaned just slightly closer, her voice dropping into a soft whisper. "Keep sitting beside me," she said, her words barely audible. "And I'll forget we're just friends." I froze, my mind scrambling to process the weight of what she had said. Her eyes, warm and steady, met mine, and in that instant, the playful tension, the teasing touches, and the quiet proximity we had shared over weeks of casual visits crystallized into something undeniable. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I felt an almost electric awareness of her body so close to mine, the faint brush of her knee against my leg, the slight shift of her shoulder, as she leaned back just enough to meet my gaze. For a moment neither of us moved. The words hung in the air like a delicate, fragile promise, and I realized that the quiet intimacy we had been cultivating had been building toward this point all along. She wasn't forcing anything, she was simply acknowledging the pull that had been growing between us in whispers, in touches, in shared laughter. And in that acknowledgement there was trust, there was vulnerability, and there was an invitation I didn't dare refuse. I found myself leaning in slightly, just enough to feel the warmth of her arm against mine. My voice caught when I finally spoke, careful, almost reverent. I didn't know you felt that way," I admitted, my eyes tracing the curve of her smile, the softness in her expression, the unspoken depth of feeling that lay beneath it. She only smiled, a quiet, knowing curve of her lips, and leaned back just enough to create a shared space between us, a space that was intimate, tentative, and full of possibilities. The whispered line had shifted something fundamental. The tension that had been teasing the edges of our friendship now had a name, a recognition that neither of us could deny. And even though nothing else happened that night, no grand gestures, no confessions beyond that single, whispered truth, the air between us vibrated with a new awareness, a slow burn ignition that promised something deeper, something profoundly human, and profoundly ours. The days that followed her whispered words were strange, charged with a tension I couldn't quite name. I saw her more often now, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just passing through the living room, and every interaction seemed to hum with unspoken meaning. I noticed the way she lingered in the kitchen when I poured myself a drink, the way her glance would flick to me and hold just a second too long. Every brush of her fingers against mine, every accidental shoulder bump, became magnified in my awareness, a quiet symphony of attraction I didn't dare fully acknowledge. But there was restraint on both sides. I reminded myself constantly, she was my friend's mom, a woman I respected deeply, someone whose trust one could never jeopardize. And yet, every moment in her proximity tested my resolve. I found myself timing my movements, adjusting how I sat beside her, the angle of my shoulder, even the volume of my voice when we spoke together. It was exhausting, this constant balancing act between desire and propriety, but also exhilarating in a way that made the ordinary seem electric. She, too, seemed aware of the pull. There were little hints, subtle touches that lingered just a moment longer than necessary, smiles that held a secret humor, a softness in her gaze that suggested understanding without words. I caught her brushing her hair back from her face and noticed how her fingers hovered near mine as if testing boundaries. When our eyes met across the room, there was an almost imperceptible pause, a silent acknowledgement of the tension simmering between us. Even in casual conversation, the restraint was palpable. We shared laughter at jokes that no one else would understand, our heads leaning slightly toward each other, shoulders brushing in the smallest, most deliberate ways. Every moment seemed charged with the potential for something more, yet both of us held back, savoring the quiet thrill of closeness without forcing it into words or actions. There was a delicate intimacy in that restraint, a sense that the tension itself was part of the connection, a slow, intoxicating dance neither of us wanted to rush. I noticed how her presence affected me outside her home, too. When I walked past her on the street, or saw her in a texted photograph, a warmth would bloom in my chest. I remembered the feel of her sweater against my arm, the subtle fragrance that clung to her, the soft brush of her hand as she passed me something across the counter. Those memories became almost addictive, little sparks of longing that made me ache to be near her again, while at the same time, reminded me to hold back. By the end of the week, it was clear, the attraction was mutual, undeniable, but held carefully in check. Our restraint wasn't cold or distant, it was a conscious, shared respect, an acknowledgement that the tension itself was part of the thrill. Every glance, every brush of skin, every quiet moment became a silent conversation, a slow unraveling of feelings that neither of us could name fully but both understood. And in that careful hesitation, I felt closer to her than ever, suspended in a delicate balance between longing and propriety, craving more even as I respected the boundaries that kept our connection quietly alive. The night it happened, rain tapped gently against the windows, the kind of steady rhythm that made the whole house feel cocooned in quiet. My friend had gone upstairs early, leaving me alone in the kitchen with his mom. She had brewed a pot of tea, the steam rising between us like a fragile veil, and the soft glow of the overhead light wrapped the room in warmth. We sat at the table, our mugs between us, neither of us in a hurry to fill the silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it was heavy with the kind of unspoken things we both carried. She traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, her fingers delicate, her eyes fixed on the swirling surface of her drink. I couldn't help but study her in that moment, the curve of her profile, the small lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of both laughter and loss, the way her shoulders lifted as if she were holding something in. Finally she spoke. "You know, it's been a long time since I've felt like I could really talk to someone." Her voice was soft, edged with something vulnerable, something unguarded. My chest tightened, and I leaned a little closer, resting my arms on the table. "You can talk to me," I said quietly, and the words weren't just polite, they were true. I meant them more than I'd realized until they left my mouth. She glanced at me then, and the look in her eyes made me forget how to breathe. There was gratitude there, but also something deeper, something fragile, as though she was handing me a part of herself she rarely showed. "I don't know why, but with you, it feels easy. Like I don't have to pretend I'm fine all the time." Her words disarmed me. I reached across the table without thinking, my fingers brushing lightly over hers. Her hand trembled faintly beneath my touch, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, letting my hand rest in hers. The warmth of her skin seeped into me, and the contact felt both grounding and electric. "I like being here," I admitted, my voice lower than usual, almost as if I were afraid the room might betray us. "Not just because this house feels like a second home, but because of you. I look forward to being near you." For a moment, she closed her eyes, as if steadying herself. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. The sensation was overwhelming, the weight of her cheek, the soft brush of her hair against my neck, the steady rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. "I shouldn't say this," she whispered, "but I don't want you to go just yet." I didn't move. I didn't dare. My hand tightened slightly around hers, a silent promise that I wasn't going anywhere. The rain outside filled the silence, but between us, words weren't necessary. The closeness, the trust, the quiet confessions in our body language said more than we ever could. That night, something shifted. The restraint of the past days gave way to honesty. We hadn't crossed any forbidden line, but we had acknowledged what lingered between us. And for the first time, the attraction was no longer hidden, it was spoken, confessed, and quietly cherished in the safety of that storm-lit kitchen. The morning after the storm felt brighter, calmer, as if the world itself had softened. Sunlight spilled gently through the kitchen window, glinting off the edges of the counter, and the air held the faint scent of coffee brewing. I came downstairs expecting to feel awkward after the quiet confessions we had shared the night before. But instead, there was a warmth, a sense of ease, as though we had both silently agreed to let honesty settle comfortably between us. She was already there, standing at the stove in a simple cardigan and loose hair, humming to herself as she stirred something in a pan. The scene was domestic, ordinary even, but I felt my chest tighten with an affection I couldn't quite hide. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard me enter, her smile soft and knowing, like she'd been waiting. "Morning," she said gently, her voice carrying that quiet steadiness I had come to crave. "Morning," I echoed, sliding into a chair at the kitchen table. For a moment I just watched her move, the graceful way she reached for a plate, the casual tuck of hair behind her ear, the way her presence filled the room with an ease I never wanted to lose. When she set the plate down in front of me, just toast and eggs, nothing elaborate, our hands brushed again. This time neither of us pulled away. My fingers lingered on hers, and she let them, her eyes meeting mine with an unspoken acknowledgement. The contact was simple, innocent, but it carried the weight of everything we had shared, the glances, the whispers, the confessions. We ate together in companionable silence, the kind that feels like a conversation all its own. Every so often, she'd smile at me across the table, and I'd feel that same familiar pull in my chest, a mix of admiration and quiet longing. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was something deeper, something steadier. After breakfast, we carried our mugs of coffee to the porch, where the world was still damp from the rain. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers, and the chairs creaked softly as we settled side by side. She pulled a blanket over her lap and, without a word, draped part of it across mine as well. The gesture was casual, yet intimate, and I felt myself lean just slightly closer, letting my arm brush against hers. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of unspoken understanding, the kind of silence that said, "I see you. I feel this too." Finally, she broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this means for us. But I do know. I like having you here. More than I probably should." I turned to her, meeting her eyes with quiet certainty. "Then let me stay. Not just here in this house, but here, with you." She smiled then, a smile that carried both relief and something brighter, like hope. Slowly, she rested her hand on mine, her thumb brushing lightly across my skin, and leaned just enough for her shoulder to press softly into mine. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was something far better, two people choosing, in the gentlest way possible, to honor the connection they had found. And as we sat there, side by side, wrapped in the quiet comfort of morning light and shared closeness, I knew this was only the beginning of something tender, fragile, and beautifully real.